Okay, so this particular question about the empirical rule and what percent lies between two observations, this isn't necessarily a Excel skill, but it's a good question to kind of talk about how Excel can maybe help guide and direct your thoughts on this. So what we're told is we're given a mean and a standard deviation, and we're asked to use the empirical rule to determine percent of data between two given observations. So when they say empirical rule, they're trying to get us to think of this, the 68, 95, 99.7 rule, where if I know how many standard deviations above or below a certain observation is, then I can make an estimate about the percent of the data that falls between those values. And then I can get even more detailed, and I can say that if 68 is within one standard deviation, then that means 34 is from here, from the mean to one standard deviation below, 34 to one standard deviation above, and I can actually break up each of these percents a little bit more in detail, just using the idea of symmetry and that it's half below and half above. And so I think this picture is going to be a little bit more useful as far as calculating these percents. Okay, so let's use this empirical rule and let's actually make some numbers that represent our standard deviation. So if we start with a mean of 100 and we go one standard deviation above, we're at 119. And let's take the 119 and let's add another 19, and that'll give us 2 standard deviations above. And let's go one more above it to give us 3 standard deviations above. So those numbers represent the mean. Wow, where are my fingers? That represents the mean. And then those 3 represent 3 standard deviations above. Now let's go below that. So 100 minus 19 is 81. Then let's take 81, deduct another 19, so 62 is 2 standard deviations below. And then let's go 62 minus 19 gives us 3. So let me kind of set up our little picture here as far as how many standard deviations around something is. Okay. And then let's take a look at our question. So question A says between 62 and 138. Well, 62 happens to be negative 2 standard deviations below, and 138 happens to be 2 standard deviations above. So 2 below, 2 above actually puts us at 95%. So 95% of our data happens to fall between those two numbers. B is less than 81 or greater than 119. So less than 81, greater than 119. Well, in this case, I'm going to say it's going to be easier because 81 is 1 standard deviation below, 119 is 1 standard deviation above. So you're looking at 68% of your data between those two numbers. And since I'm looking outside, then let's do this. Let's take 100 minus 68. And so it has to be 32% of our data fits between those two particular values. In other words, 32% is outside 68% mark. All right, and then our third question, what percent of the data is greater than 157? So if 3 standard deviations of the data count between 99.7, then I want to take that, first off, let's take that and subtract from 100. 99.7, and I get 0.3. And then each tail, so each outer part of that has to divide by 2. So this part and that part all add up to the 0.3. So I want really half of that. So that would be 0.15. So 0.15% of the data, not 15%, but 0.15% of the data, let me write that down, would be greater than the 157 mark. Anyways, so that's how this particular thing works in using these different percents.